The January 6th committee, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff, do you think there's any merit to the former president's claims?
No, I don't. Not at all. First of all, it's not up to the former president. It's up to the current president, and that is where the heavy weight is given in terms of the assertion and non-assertion of privilege. And even if it were a privilege to apply here, the circumstances are such as the President Biden has indicated, where any privilege has to give way to the public's need to know. This was a violent attack on the Capitol. There is a continuing threat of domestic terrorism and potentially more violence directed against our government. And we need to be able to investigate what happened, what led up to it, and make recommendations about protecting the country going forward. So hard to have a weaker claim of privilege, but even if a privilege did apply, it's for the current president to assert. He hasn't. And even then, it would be outweighed by the public interest.
There are some Republicans in the House who have already making the argument that the president's lawyers are making, saying, well, look, if a Republican gets into office next time around and decides to, act in the same way, that there's a lot of Republicans in Congress who would like to haul in, members of the Biden administration to ask questions. I mean, do you worry about a precedent that could be set?
I don't worry about a precedent. The Republican argument is essentially, if you make a good faith request for information for people about a violent attack on the Capitol, and the current president believes that the public interest is served by letting Congress know what happened, then we will abuse that to probe any Democratic president's staff. That's not much of an argument, but that's basically what they're saying. We will be vindictive. We will draw some false equivalence, and we will abuse our power if we're given it again. To me, that's simply an argument to make sure they never take the majority.
If the case does end up at the Supreme Court, do you have confidence in how the court would rule in the position you want them to?
Well, it depends ultimately whether they're a conservative court, in which, yes, I would have a lot of confidence they would rule in our favor. It's a pretty easy decision to make. But if they're a partisan court, if that's all that the Supreme Court has become, an instrument of one party, that is the Republican Party, then all bets are off. I have to hope that that's not the legacy that the Chief Justice wants of the court that bears his name. But at the end of the day, if they're following the law, if they're following the Constitution, it's a very easy decision to make. And the Trump lawyers know this. Their real hope is to simply delay, and just as they did with the testimony of Don McGahn. This is part of their stratagem. It's not really based on the law or Constitution, just hoping to run out the clock.
The January 6th committee chairman, Benny Thompson, said tonight that he'd be signing and sending a letter to Mark Meadows, repeating the committee's request for him to answer questions. If Meadows continues to ignore that request, do you believe the committee will move to hold him in contempt of Congress? And how much time do you give a person? It seems pretty clear what his strategy is here.
We met as a committee today to discuss the next steps with Meadows, Clark, and other steps the committee will be taking. I don't think we've actually reached resolution on those questions, but I think to a person, the committee feels that the witnesses that have refused to appear have no basis to do so, and that we need to hold them accountable. And we're discussing the best ways to do it. I'm very pleased that the Justice Department moved with as much alacrity as they did to hold Steve Bannon accountable. I think for 4 years, he and others were under the impression that they were above the law and could stonewall the Congress or just ignore a subpoena. The Justice Department demonstrated, no, the law applies equally to everyone. And we are considering that remedy again. And we don't have a decision to announce at this point, but I hope we'll have one soon.
So lastly, I spoke earlier about the pending censure vote against Gosar tomorrow. Besides Representatives Kinzinger, possibly Cheney, do you think any other Republicans will vote to punish him?
I don't know. There were Republicans that voted for an infrastructure bill who are now being threatened by members of their Republican conference with being expelled from their committees because they had the audacity to vote for a bipartisan infrastructure bill. So the Republican conference under Kevin McCarthy is capable of anything. They certainly haven't taken any steps to discourage the glorification of violence by their members or by the former president. So will others show courage the way that Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney and a few others have. I don't know, but it just shows, I think, the dangerous state that the Republican conference is in today, where they have fealty to a president who continues to lie about the last election, and they join in that lie to the detriment of our democracy.
Congressman Schiff, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.